Imagine a city so wealthy, so strategically shrewd, that it turned trade into a weapon, and commerce into conquest. This was Carthage, a city that dared to challenge the mightiest empire of its time, Rome. While most histories glorify swords and legions, the true battleground between Carthage and Rome was not always on fields drenched in blood, it was in marketplaces, harbors, and the vaults of financial power. Carthage, perched on the coast of North Africa, commanded trade across the Mediterranean. Its merchants were masters of supply and demand, controlling grain, silver, olive oil, and the flow of goods that fed the cities of the ancient world. They didn't just sell products, they shaped economies, dictated alliances, and wielded influence that rivaled armies. Rome, by contrast, was still emerging from its agricultural roots, a city-state with ambition but without the same economic muscle. Through its naval supremacy and commercial networks, Carthage imposed economic pressure with precision. They could disrupt trade routes, control resources, and use wealth as a lever to sway allies or weaken foes. Rome learned quickly that defeating Carthage required more than brute force, it demanded understanding the power of commerce, credit, and taxation. In this clash of civilizations, Carthage taught a timeless lesson. True power is not always forged in iron and blood but often in strategy, innovation, and the flow of money. While the Punic Wars are remembered for Hannibal's elephants crossing the Alps, the economic chess game played in markets and ports set the stage for the rise and fall of empires. Carthage challenged Rome not just with armies, but with economics. Proving that commerce can be as formidable as conquest, and that wealth, when wielded wisely, can shake even the foundations of the greatest empire. Carthage was more than just a city, it was a powerhouse of economic ingenuity and strategic commerce that shook the foundations of the ancient world. Long before armies clashed on battlefields, Carthage built its empire through the careful cultivation of wealth, trade, and financial influence. Situated on the coast of North Africa, it commanded a prime location that allowed it to dominate the Mediterranean, linking Europe, Africa, and the Near East in a vast network of exchange. But Carthage's true strength lay not merely in its geographic position, it lay in the sophistication of its economic system. Carthaginian merchants were not ordinary traders. They were innovators and strategists who understood that control over commerce could yield power far beyond what a simple army could achieve. By carefully managing the flow of goods, from grain and olive oil to precious metals and luxury items, Carthage created a system in which their wealth became a form of influence. Every shipment sent across the Mediterranean was not just merchandise. It was a message, a tool, a strategic move designed to strengthen Carthage's position while subtly undermining potential rivals, including Rome. Rome, in its early years, was a city-state with ambition and a growing population, but it lacked the sophisticated financial networks that Carthage had meticulously developed over centuries. While Roman power would eventually rise through sheer military force, Carthage demonstrated that economic mastery could pose a serious challenge to even the most determined military power. Through its control of trade routes, Carthage could dictate the flow of essential resources, impacting cities and regions far beyond its immediate borders. The city's wealth allowed it to fund not only its navy and army but also political alliances, mercenary forces, and infrastructure projects that strengthened its dominance. In effect, money became a weapon, one that could sway the loyalty of allies, disrupt rival economies, and create dependencies that worked in Carthage's favor. What makes Carthage's economic strategy so remarkable is its foresight. The city's leaders understood that wealth, carefully cultivated and strategically applied, could extend influence more reliably and sustainably than conquest alone. While Rome relied on conquest to expand its territory, Carthage relied on trade, finance, and resource management to consolidate power. In doing so, Carthage challenged the very idea of how empires could assert dominance, showing that economic control could be as formidable as military might. The lessons of Carthage's approach resonate even today, reminding us that commerce is not merely a tool for personal gain but a mechanism that can shape politics, strategy, and the fate of nations. Carthage's example demonstrates that economic power is not passive. It is active, dynamic, and capable of challenging even the greatest empires. By turning wealth into influence, the city proved that control over trade and finance could rival the might of armies, and that in the hands of visionary leaders, money could become an instrument of empire itself. Carthage's dominance in the Mediterranean was not accidental, it was the result of a meticulously planned and expertly executed network of trade that gave the city unprecedented strategic leverage. The Carthaginians understood that controlling the flow of goods across the seas was as powerful as controlling armies on land. Their merchants established trade routes that connected Africa, southern Europe, and the Near East, creating a system where Carthage could influence economies, politics, and alliances far beyond its borders. Grain from North Africa, silver from Iberia, fine textiles, and luxury goods moved along these routes, making Carthage indispensable to cities and states that relied on imported resources. This control of essential commodities allowed Carthage not only to profit immensely but also to gain political influence, as allies and rivals alike had to navigate Carthage's economic power to secure supplies for their populations and armies. The city's naval strength amplified its economic reach. Carthage's fleet was not only a military tool but a commercial instrument that protected its merchant ships, patrolled trade routes, and ensured that key maritime corridors remained under Carthaginian control. With the ability to secure or disrupt trade, Carthage could pressure rivals without necessarily engaging in open warfare. A blockade, the manipulation of essential goods, or the strategic rerouting of trade could have devastating effects on competitors, particularly on Rome, which relied increasingly on imported resources to sustain its growing population. Carthage's mastery of these trade networks allowed it to exert subtle yet profound influence, demonstrating that economic leverage could rival the effects of military conquest. Moreover, Carthage's trade networks created a web of dependencies. Cities and states that engaged in commerce with Carthage often found themselves reliant on its goods and infrastructure, tying their prosperity to the stability and favor of Carthage. This dependence gave Carthage a form of soft power that extended beyond its immediate territory, allowing it to shape alliances, influence policies, and even manipulate conflicts to its advantage. It was a sophisticated form of strategy, one that relied on careful calculation, negotiation, and the management of resources as instruments of power. This emphasis on trade and economic influence marked Carthage as a formidable competitor to Rome long before the famous battles of the Punic Wars. While Rome would eventually leverage its military might to challenge Carthage, the Carthaginians had already demonstrated that control over commerce could achieve political and strategic goals without bloodshed. Their trade networks were a battlefield in themselves, where success was measured not only in profit but in influence, control, and the ability to shape the decisions of rival powers. Carthage's ability to dominate trade illustrates the enduring principle that commerce can be weaponized. By understanding and exploiting the interconnectedness of Mediterranean economies, Carthage showed that wealth and influence, strategically applied, could be as decisive as armies and fortresses. The city's trade networks were not just economic lifelines. They were the very framework of Carthage's power, proving that in the ancient world, mastery of commerce could challenge the mightiest empires. Carthage's genius was not only in amassing wealth and controlling trade routes but in using commerce itself as a weapon to achieve strategic objectives. Unlike traditional forms of warfare, which relied on armies, sieges, and battles, Carthage demonstrated that economic influence could accomplish what armies alone might struggle to achieve. The Carthaginians understood that controlling the flow of resources, regulating trade, and manipulating markets could shape the decisions of rival powers, destabilize competitors, and even alter the course of wars. By turning commerce into a tool of strategy, Carthage elevated trade to a form of soft power that rivaled, and at times exceeded, the impact of military force. Carthage's ability to wield trade as a weapon relied on precision and foresight. The city's leaders and merchants carefully monitored supply chains, knowing which regions depended on essential goods such as grain, metals, and luxury items. By controlling these commodities, Carthage could apply pressure where it mattered most. A disruption in grain shipments could threaten a city-state's population, creating political unrest and forcing leaders to seek Carthaginian favor. By selectively granting access to trade routes or resources, Carthage could manipulate alliances, reward loyalty, or punish defiance without ever raising a sword. This economic strategy allowed Carthage to exert influence across the Mediterranean, shaping events in ways that traditional warfare alone could not achieve. Naval supremacy was a critical enabler of this economic warfare. Carthage's formidable fleet protected merchant vessels, safeguarded key trade routes, and allowed the city to project power across the seas. The ability to control maritime commerce meant that Carthage could block rivals' access to essential goods, creating shortages or delaying supplies to weaken enemy states. Rome, in its early expansion, found itself particularly vulnerable to these tactics. Dependent on imported grain and trade connections to sustain its growing population, Rome could not ignore the economic pressure applied by Carthaginian control of the seas and markets. Carthage demonstrated that strategic disruption of trade could be as effective as a siege on a city, proving that commerce could be weaponized to achieve political and military goals simultaneously. Carthage's economic strategy extended beyond immediate pressure tactics. By intertwining wealth, trade, and diplomacy, the city created long-term dependencies that reinforced its influence. Allies and client states often relied on Carthaginian goods, credit, and trade access, ensuring that Carthage's power extended far beyond its borders. This combination of economic leverage and naval strength allowed Carthage to shape events without direct confrontation, showing that strategy could transcend traditional battlefield methods. Ultimately, Carthage's use of commerce as a weapon offers a timeless lesson: true power is not confined to armies and weapons. By carefully managing trade, wealth, and resources, Carthage could challenge Rome and other competitors in ways that reshaped the political landscape. Commerce, when wielded with intelligence and foresight, became a force capable of dictating the fate of empires and redefining the meaning of power itself. Rome's encounter with Carthage revealed a critical truth about power: brute force alone is insufficient to secure dominance. While Rome was known for its disciplined legions and strategic battlefield tactics, it quickly realized that Carthage presented a different kind of challenge, one rooted in economic mastery rather than sheer military might. The Carthaginians had built an empire on wealth, trade, and influence, and their control over Mediterranean commerce allowed them to exert pressure in ways that armies could not. Rome, initially confident in its growing military strength, had to confront the reality that to defeat Carthage, it would need to understand and counter the economic strategies that underpinned Carthaginian power. Carthage's advantage was multifaceted. Their merchants controlled critical trade routes, managed the distribution of essential goods, and forged alliances through economic incentives. Grain from North Africa, metals from Iberia, and luxury goods flowing through Carthaginian ports were not just commodities, they were instruments of influence. Rome, dependent on these imports to sustain its population and expanding territories, faced vulnerability in the very markets where Carthage held sway. The Romans learned that military conquest alone could not guarantee victory if Carthage could leverage commerce to disrupt supplies, sway allies, or finance its own strategic operations. To overcome this challenge, Rome began to adapt, developing strategies that recognized the importance of economic power. They invested in infrastructure, built a stronger navy, and secured alternative trade routes to reduce their dependence on Carthaginian-controlled commerce. Roman leaders understood that defeating Carthage required more than battlefield victories; it required a comprehensive approach that combined military might with economic strategy. Rome's ability to eventually counter Carthage's economic influence demonstrated a critical lesson: empires must recognize the interconnectedness of commerce, resources, and power. This confrontation also highlighted a broader principle that extends beyond the ancient world. Carthage showed that economic intelligence, understanding trade, resource management, and the leverage provided by wealth, can be as decisive as tactical genius on the battlefield. Rome's eventual success was not simply the result of superior arms, it was the product of adapting to the challenge posed by Carthage's economic power. By learning to anticipate and neutralize the effects of Carthaginian commerce, Rome demonstrated that understanding the financial and strategic foundations of a rival's power is essential to securing long-term dominance. Ultimately, the struggle between Rome and Carthage illustrates that victory in any conflict depends on more than military strength alone. Economic strategy, trade management, and financial foresight are equally important in shaping the outcomes of empires. Rome's experience with Carthage serves as a powerful reminder that true power is multidimensional, and that understanding the economic foundations of influence is just as crucial as mastering the art of war. Carthage challenged Rome not only with armies but with the invisible weapons of commerce and strategy, teaching a timeless lesson about the complex nature of power in any age. The story of Carthage and Rome offers a lesson that resonates far beyond the ancient Mediterranean. True power is often multidimensional, blending military strength, political savvy, and economic intelligence. While history tends to glorify the clash of armies and the brilliance of battlefield tactics, the confrontation between Carthage and Rome demonstrates that the flow of wealth and the control of resources can be equally decisive in shaping the fate of empires. Carthage's use of commerce, trade networks, and financial influence was a deliberate strategy designed to challenge Rome, proving that economics is not merely a tool for survival but a form of power capable of redefining the balance between states. Carthage's approach to power was rooted in foresight and strategy. By controlling trade routes, managing essential commodities, and creating a network of dependencies across the Mediterranean, Carthage established influence that extended far beyond its immediate territory. Allies relied on Carthaginian goods and markets, while rivals felt the pressure of economic manipulation. This kind of power is subtle, often invisible to the naked eye, yet it can be more enduring and far-reaching than military conquest alone. Carthage's wealth was not hoarded or spent frivolously, it was actively deployed as a tool of influence, capable of shaping politics, diplomacy, and even the course of wars. Rome, in facing Carthage, learned the critical importance of recognizing and countering this form of power. Military victories alone would not suffice if Carthage could control supplies, sway allies, and fund operations through its economic networks. The Romans adapted by developing their own economic infrastructure, securing alternative resources, and building a navy capable of contesting Carthaginian dominance at sea. This adaptability was essential to their eventual success, and it underscores a timeless principle: empires rise not only through force of arms but through strategic understanding of the financial and economic systems that sustain power. The lesson of Carthage extends beyond the historical context of Rome and the Mediterranean. It is a reminder that influence often lies in the management of wealth, trade, and resources, and that those who master these forces can challenge even the mightiest opponents. Commerce, credit, and the ability to shape economic outcomes are as powerful as armies in determining the destinies of nations. Carthage demonstrated that strategy and foresight in the economic sphere could produce results that echo across generations, creating lessons for leaders, states, and empires long after the city itself was destroyed. Ultimately, Carthage challenged Rome not only with legions and fleets but with an understanding of power that transcended conventional warfare. Its reliance on economic strategy, trade networks, and financial leverage illustrates that true power is holistic, requiring mastery of both visible and invisible tools of influence. In the story of Carthage and Rome, we see more than a tale of war, we see a lesson in the true nature of power. Carthage challenged Rome not only with armies and elephants, not only with fortresses and weapons, but with the invisible, yet devastating, force of commerce. It wielded trade, wealth, and economic influence as tools of strategy, demonstrating that money, resources, and clever management can shape the destiny of empires just as decisively as the sword. Rome's eventual triumph was not a simple victory of brute force, it was a lesson learned in adaptability, in understanding the multiple dimensions of power, and in recognizing that influence extends far beyond what we see on the battlefield. Carthage's legacy teaches us that economic foresight, strategic thinking, and innovation are as critical to success as courage and martial skill. Power is never one-dimensional, it is a web of interlocking forces, political, military, and economic, each capable of tipping the scales of history. Even in defeat, Carthage showed the world that commerce could challenge kingdoms, that trade could dictate strategy, and that intelligence in the marketplace could rival brilliance on the battlefield.